A single temple bell cuts through the dawn mist. What if 7 questions, the same ones monks ask themselves, could end your doubt today, before your coffee cools? Picture a senior monk walking the stone corridor at first light, incense curling upward in lazy spirals, prayer flags breathing with the wind like lungs filling and emptying. He's not chasing enlightenment like it's some finish line 20 years away. He's testing his mind right now. This breath, this step, with questions so simple they sound almost insulting, until you try them and realize you've been flying blind your whole life. Buddhist teachings aren't meant to be theoretical decorations. They're meant to be field-tested in the next 5 minutes, and that's exactly what we're about to do together. Here's the problem nobody talks about. Effort without clarity just breeds more doubt, more second-guessing, more of that exhausting loop where you're working hard but have no idea if you're working smart. You meditate, you read the books, you try to be more mindful, but something's still off, still murky, and you can't quite name it. Buddhist wisdom has known this trap for millennia, and the antidote isn't more effort, it's better questions. In the next few minutes, you'll get 7 monastic questions you can test today, right where you are. Zero metaphysics, only cause and effect you can verify with your own experience. These aren't abstract koans that require a PhD in Buddhist philosophy. They're precision tools that Buddhist monks' teachings have refined over centuries of daily Buddhist practice. We're pulling from the advice to Rahula in the Majjhima Nikaya 61 and the Kalama Sutta in Anguttara Nikaya 3. 65 mentioned once, so you know this isn't something I made up last Tuesday. But we're not here for a history lecture. We're here because you're tired of doubt and you want something that works, something rooted in Buddhist mindfulness and Vipassana meditation and Zen meditation, but stripped down to what you can actually use before lunch. The Noble Eightfold Path and the 4 Noble Truths aren't distant ideals. They're alive in these 7 questions. And by the end of this, you'll have a map that Buddhist spirituality has been handing down in Dharma talks and Buddhist stories and parables for generations. So let's walk this stone corridor together, you and I, and see what happens when we stop guessing and start seeing. 1. Is this intention skillful or unskillful right now? Picture this. You're about to send that text message, your thumb hovering over the screen. In a monastery halfway across the world, a monk pauses beneath the Bodhi tree, counting beads one by one, asking himself the same question you should be asking right now. Is this intention I'm carrying skillful or unskillful? Buddhist teachings aren't locked away in ancient scrolls. They're alive in moments like these when we catch ourselves mid-motion and dare to look at what's actually driving us. The Noble Eightfold Path doesn't start with perfection. It starts with noticing, and noticing begins with a single honest question that cuts through all the noise. Here's your 60-second micro-practice, something Buddhist monks' teachings have refined over centuries. Name your intention in one verb, just one. To defend, to impress, to help. Feel what happens in your body when you name it. Does your breath shrink? Does your jaw clench like you're bracing for impact? If it does, whisper to yourself, unskillful, noted, and then soften your exhale, letting it spill out longer than the inhale. This isn't about guilt or shame. Buddhist mindfulness teaches us that labeling something unskillful is like a doctor naming a fever. You're diagnosing, not condemning. Vipassana meditation trains you to see the texture of your own mind without flinching, and right now you're doing exactly that. We've all fired off words we couldn't take back, made choices that felt right for 3 seconds and wrong for 3 years. Buddhist philosophy reminds us that Dharma talks aren't meant to be distant lectures. They're meant to be field-tested in the grocery line, in the argument with your partner, in the quiet moment before you hit post. The 4 Noble Truths tell us suffering has a cause, and often that cause is hiding in plain sight, wrapped in an intention we never bothered to name. So before you move forward, before the next decision, ask yourself again, is this intention skillful or unskillful right now? Because once you start asking, something shifts, and that shift is where Buddhist spirituality begins to breathe through your daily life. 2. Short hit or long-term benefit? There's a monk standing by a well, holding a water ladle in his weathered hands. He could take a single sip, quick relief, instant satisfaction, or he could lower the bucket deep, pull up enough water to fill the clay jars that'll sustain him through the dry season. You and I were making that same choice 100 times a day, aren't we? Buddhist wisdom teaches us to recognize the difference between what feels good right now and what actually serves us tomorrow, next week, 10 years down the road. It's not about denying yourself pleasure or becoming some kind of spiritual ascetic. It's about asking one brutally honest question. Am I reaching for the ladle or the well? Here's your micro practice, and it's deceptively simple. Picture yourself 24 hours from now, standing in tomorrow morning's light. Ask yourself, will I respect this choice when I wake up? Not, will I regret it? That's too heavy, too loaded with shame. But, will I respect it? Buddhist teachings for beginners often emphasize this kind of time travel visualization because it bypasses all our clever justifications and lands you right in the consequence. Daily Buddhist practice isn't built on grand gestures. It's built on these tiny recalibrations. These moments when you pause and check whether you're building a life or just managing a craving. Zen meditation trains you to sit with discomfort long enough to see what's real. And this question does the same thing in 60 seconds. We live in a world that's engineered to sell us short hits. Dopamine spikes disguised as progress, comfort disguised as care. But Buddhist life lessons whisper something different. The things that sustain you rarely announce themselves with fireworks. They're quieter, deeper, like roots spreading beneath the surface where nobody's watching. The Noble Eightfold Path doesn't promise you'll never want the quick fix. It promises you'll start seeing it for what it is, and in that seeing, you'll have a choice you didn't have before. So before you reach for the next thing, the scroll, the snack, the shortcut, pause for just a breath and ask, short hit or long-term benefit? Because that question alone is the beginning of something you might not expect. 3. What should be cultivated? What abandoned? A monk kneels beside a small garden next to the vihara, pulling weeds with one hand while watering seedlings with the other. He's not doing both at random. He knows exactly what needs to grow and what needs to go, and he doesn't waste a single motion debating it. Buddhist philosophy hands us the same clarity if we're willing to reach for it. Life isn't about adding more and more until we collapse under the weight. It's about tending what nourishes us and releasing what drains us. Dharma talks have been saying this for 25 centuries, but somehow, we still act like we can carry everything. Keep every habit, maintain every relationship, scroll every feed, and somehow not end up exhausted and confused. Here's your micro practice, and you can do it right now with a scrap of paper or the Notes app on your phone. Write 2 words, grow and drop, and then fill in one item under each. Just one. Maybe grow, morning silence, and drop, checking email before breakfast. Buddhist mindfulness isn't about overhauling your entire existence by Thursday. It's about making one intelligent cut and one intentional planting, then watching what happens. Vipassana meditation teaches us that awareness itself is the gardener. You don't have to force the weeds out, you just have to see them clearly and they lose their grip. Now here's the part that separates tourists from practitioners. Act on the drop item within the hour. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Within the hour. We've all made lists that turned into monuments to good intentions, haven't we? Buddhist spirituality doesn't care about your list. It cares about your action. The 4 Noble Truths tell us that clinging is suffering, and clinging doesn't always look like desperation. Sometimes it looks like loyalty to a habit that stopped serving you 3 years ago. Buddhist stories and parables are full of monks who let go of one thing and discovered space for 10 better things to grow. So you've named what should be cultivated and what should be abandoned. Now comes the part where you actually tend the garden. Because the next question waiting for you isn't theoretical, and neither is the ground beneath your feet. 4. Check it 3 times. Before, during, after. Imagine a craftsman in his workshop, bent over a piece of wood he's been shaping for hours. He doesn't just glance at it when he's finished and call it done. He checks the grain before the first cut, runs his fingers along the surface during the carving, and holds it up to the light after the final stroke. Buddhist teachings remind us that wise action isn't a single moment. It's a 3-part conversation with reality, and most of us are only showing up for 1/3 of it. We check our intention before we act, maybe if we're lucky. But then we go on autopilot and never look again until it's over, and we're wondering why things didn't turn out the way we hoped. The Noble Eightfold Path doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence at 3 critical junctures, and that changes everything. Here's your micro practice, and it's going to feel strange at first because we're so used to charging through tasks like they're obstacles to clear. Set a 2-minute timer halfway through whatever you're doing next. Could be washing dishes, writing an email, having a conversation. Doesn't matter. When that timer goes off, pause right there in the middle and rescan your intention. Ask yourself, is this still what I meant to do, or did I drift? Buddhist mindfulness teaches us that intention is like a compass needle. It can shift without us noticing, especially when we're tired or triggered, or just moving too fast to feel the turn. Zen meditation builds this muscle of mid-course correction, training you to catch yourself before you've wandered 3 miles off the path. If the intention's shifted, adjust it. If it's gone sour, stop entirely. No shame, no drama, just accurate seeing and intelligent response. We live most of our lives in a strange blur between starting and finishing, and that's where Buddhist wisdom says the real work happens. Daily Buddhist practice isn't about nailing the beginning and the end like some kind of spiritual performance. It's about staying awake during the messy, unglamorous middle when nobody's watching, and it would be so easy to coast. Buddhist philosophy calls this right effort, and it's not about grinding harder. It's about checking in, again and again, with what's actually happening versus what you thought was going to happen. The craftsman knows his work isn't done until he's checked it 3 times and you're holding tools just as sharp. So before you move to the next thing, remember, the middle matters more than you think, and the next checkpoint is already closer than you realize. Mind states are actions, too. Wind moves through prayer flags strung across the monastery courtyard, and a monk watches his thoughts flutter just like those colored squares of cloth, appearing, shifting, disappearing. Here's something Buddhist teachings want you to understand that'll probably mess with your head a little. Your mind states aren't just passive weather patterns you're stuck enduring. They're actions, they're they're choices you're making, even when it doesn't feel like choosing. We've been taught to think that only what we do with our hands and mouths counts as action. But Dharma talks have been saying for millennia that what you do with your attention, your focus, your mental energy, that's action too, and it leaves traces just as real as footprints in mud. Here's your micro practice for when anxiety spikes or anger flares or that familiar spiral starts spinning. Pause for just 10 seconds and ask yourself, which action of mind is feeding this right now? Rumination, comparison, or prediction? Buddhist mindfulness trains you to catch the specific mental action you're performing because once you name it, it's no longer invisible. Maybe you're ruminating, replaying that conversation from yesterday on loop. Maybe you're comparing yourself to someone's highlight reel. Maybe you're predicting disaster like you've got a crystal ball that only shows bad futures. Vipassana meditation teaches us that these aren't things happening to you. They're things you're doing, and anything you're doing you can stop doing. Pick one feeder, just one, and remove it for 90 seconds. Stop the comparison. Stop the prediction. See what happens when you withdraw the fuel. Most of us walk around thinking we're victims of our own minds, like thoughts are weather and we're just getting rained on. But Buddhist spirituality offers something radically different. You're not the victim, you're the actor, and even your inner life is a series of choices you're making breath by breath. The Four Noble Truths don't just apply to external actions. They apply to the stories you're telling yourself, the mental loops you're feeding, the attention you're investing in fears that haven't happened yet. Buddhist life lessons remind us that freedom doesn't come from controlling what arises. It comes from recognizing that what you do with what arises is always a choice. And speaking of choices, there's another layer here that most people miss entirely. Something hiding even in the calm moments we think are safe. 6. Where is the subtle tension here? And what causes it? Even calm can be a mask, you know. A monk sits in what looks like perfect stillness. Prayer flags breathing softly in the distance, but if you look closer, really closer, there's a tiny crease between his eyebrows, a slight tightness in his throat, a barely there clench in his solar plexus. Buddhist wisdom teaches us something most meditation apps won't tell you. Not all peace is actually peaceful, and sometimes what we call calm is just tension wearing a quieter outfit. This is the anti-metaphysics truth that separates Buddhism for beginners from deep Buddhist practice. You can't just aim for feeling good and call it enlightenment. You have to ask the uncomfortable question, where is the subtle tension here right now, even in this supposedly okay moment? And what the hell is causing it? Here's your micro practice, and it requires a kind of honesty most of us avoid because we're afraid of what we'll find. Scan your body right now for micro tension. Not the obvious stuff, not the headache or the sore back, but the barely there holding patterns. The slight tightness in your brow. The shallow breath you didn't notice you were taking. The low-grade clench in your gut that's been there so long it feels like furniture. Buddhist mindfulness trains you to locate these whispers of strain. And then, here's the key. Change the object of your attention for 60 seconds. If you've been lost in thoughts, shift to sound. If you've been focused on your breath at the chest, move it to the nostrils. Zen meditation teaches us that sometimes tension isn't about what we're experiencing. It's about how we're gripping the experience, and changing the channel can reveal the grip. Daily Buddhist practice isn't about achieving some permanent bliss state where nothing ever bothers you again. That's a fantasy. And Dharma talks have been calling out that fantasy for 25 centuries. The Noble Eightfold Path asks you to become a detective of your own subtle suffering, the kind that hides in plain sight and whispers, "This is just how things are." Buddhist philosophy says, no, this is how things are when you're holding on to something you haven't named yet. Vipassana meditation is basically 60 hours of hunting these micro-tensions until you find their roots, but you don't need a retreat to start. You just need 60 seconds and the willingness to check the tension, shift your focus, and see if it loosens. And if you're wondering why this matters so much, well, there's one more question that takes this whole investigation somewhere you might not expect. Somewhere that touches the very edge of what you think you are. 7. Given it's inconstant and stressful, is it fitting to call this me or mine? A monk kneels by a still pond under the moon's perfect reflection, and then, just for a second, he touches the water with one finger. The reflection shatters into 1,000 pieces, light scattering across the ripples, and he watches it all break apart with the faintest smile. Buddhist teachings have been pointing at this moment for centuries. Everything you think is solid and yours, your mood, your identity, your carefully constructed sense of self, is just moonlight on water, gorgeous and real feeling until you touch it and watch it dissolve. The Four Noble Truths don't tiptoe around this. They land it straight. If something is inconstant, if it shifts and changes and causes you stress when it does, is it really fitting to call it me or mine? Here's your micro practice. And it's going to feel weird because we've spent our entire lives doing the opposite. For the next 10 breaths, label whatever you're experiencing as event in awareness, rather than my experience or me feeling this. Anxiety rising? Event in awareness. Thought about dinner? Event in awareness. Itch on your left shoulder? Event in awareness. Buddhist mindfulness isn't trying to make you detached or robotic. It's trying to show you that what you call you is actually a process, not a thing, and processes don't need to be clung to the way we grip solid objects. Vipassana meditation trains you to see this over and over until it stops being a concept and starts being something you can feel. The clinging drops, maybe just 10%, but you feel the release like setting down a bag you didn't know you were carrying. We walk around acting like we own our thoughts, our feelings, our bodies, our stories, and then we suffer like hell every time they change or betray us, or don't perform the way we expected. Buddhist spirituality offers a different game entirely. What if you're not the owner, but the space in which all this arises and passes? Buddhist philosophy calls this not self, and it's not nihilism. It's freedom from the exhausting job of trying to control a river by clenching your fists around the water. Zen meditation, Dharma talks, Buddhist stories, and parables, they all circle back to this one liberating insight. The tighter you grip what's inconstant, the more you suffer, and the looser you hold it, the more you can actually enjoy the moonlight while it lasts. Watch it shatter, watch it reform. Notice how the clinging shifts when you stop calling the ripples mine. And as you sit with this, something becomes clear. Something about how all 7 of these questions were never separate at all, but threads of one single way of seeing. Doubt dissolves when seeing replaces guessing. That's not a theory. That's what just happened if you actually tested even one of these 7 questions. You didn't need to believe anything. Didn't need to convert to some new philosophy or spend 10 years in a cave. You just needed to ask better questions and pay attention to what your own experience showed you. Buddhist teachings have always worked this way. Test it, verify it, keep what's true and drop what isn't. Right now, sunlight floods the main hall, and somewhere a monk bows once. Simple, definite, done. No drama, no doubt spiraling into next week. Just clear seeing and the next step already obvious. So here's what I want to know. Which question changed your next action today? Was it the one about skillful versus unskillful intention that stopped you mid-text? Was it the short hit or long-term benefit that made you put the phone down and actually breathe? Or maybe it was that last one, the moonlight shattering on water that loosened your grip on something you've been calling mine for way too long. Tell me below in the comments what landed for you, what you're going to test in the next 24 hours. What shifted when you stopped guessing and started seeing? I read every single comment, and your experience, your honest report from the field, helps everyone walking this path. If this helped cut through even one layer of doubt, share it with someone who's stuck in mental loops, someone who's working hard but not seeing clearly. They don't need more motivation. They need better questions, and you just found 7 of them. And listen, if you want to keep going deeper, if you want more practical Buddhist life lessons and techniques like what you just experienced, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because next time, we're dismantling the 5 hindrances with the same precision you just experienced here. No fluff, no guessing, just Buddhist mindfulness and Dharma talks that actually change how you move through your day. See you there.